Welcome back to the channel. Today, as you might have guessed, I'm going to be talking about hand protection. I've been a little under the weather lately, so I don't have any new sparring footage to talk about or to give a lesson on, but I have had an excellent opportunity recently to talk about different kinds of hand protection available for HEMA fighters. So, what I've got on display, going from my right to my left, this is the Nyman fencing gauntlet, HEMA gauntlet. This is the Black Dragon HEMA gauntlet, and then these are some steel finger gauntlets that I purchased off of Amazon some time ago. And I want to talk about the advantages and disadvantages as well as the statistics of each set. Starting to my right, the Nyman gauntlets. These are actually a friend of mine. I was trying to see if they'd fit me. They're a little short for my purposes, so they are for sale. But to give you an idea of the statistics on this, for all of these, I measured the right hand gauntlet only, and the following are the weights. So for the Nyman, one gauntlet, it came in at 11 ounces, and that's 0.32 kilograms. The Red Dragon gauntlet, each one came in at 8.8 ounces and at 2.4 kilograms. And finally, unsurprisingly, the steel gauntlets are the heaviest, and each gauntlet came in at 1 pound, 9.4 ounces, or 0.72 kilograms. So in terms of weight, the heaviest is the steel, the lightest is are the Red Dragon gauntlets, and of course Nyman in the middle. And in fact, the Red Dragon gauntlets are approximately 3 times lighter than the steel gauntlets. So clearly, in terms of which is the lightest gauntlet, the Red Dragon wins, although Nyman is not too far behind. And clearly and unsurprisingly, the steel gauntlets are the heaviest. As far as price, the Red Dragon gauntlets are retailing around $85 American. The steel gauntlets I purchased on Amazon for approximately $120 American. And the Nyman gauntlets are coming in excess of $200. They're manufactured in Europe and shipped over, so I know the price is above $200. I'm not sure the exact price, but the most expensive on the table are the Nyman. The least expensive are the Red Dragon, and the steel come in right in the middle. Finally, as far as protection goes, the Nyman are far and away the most protective gauntlets. They have foldovers for the thumb and fingertips. It's a very heavy leather, well padded, very stiff leather. If I was fighting longsword in a HEMA tournament, I would definitely choose the Nyman gauntlets. They're by far the most protective. The Red Dragon are also very protective. I think they could be used for longsword sparring. They do have limited protection over the tips, and they do have overlapping lames that protect the fingers, and they're padded very well. They're not as protective as the Nyman, unsurprisingly, but they're also more articulated. The steel are probably the least protective in terms, not necessarily of the areas where the steel covers. I mean, for example, even the Nyman is not going to protect the back of your hand and your wrist as well as the steel will, for obvious reasons. However, there is exposure on the fingertips. And in fact, these are the gauntlets that I was wearing when I took a shot from a longsword that nearly took my fingernail off on my right hand, on my thumb. Since then, I've actually purchased some of the fingertip protectors that Purple Heart Armory sells online, and I've inserted them. And so, frankly, at this point, I think with those fingertip protectors, I would rate the protection provided by the steel finger gauntlets approximately the same as the Red Dragon. And I guess the last point I want to observe is, as far as articulation goes, the steel gauntlets are, in my opinion, by far the most articulated. As you can see, as we're sitting on the table, they're collapsing over. These have the best range of motion and the least restriction on your fingers that I've come across. In fact, as a result, and with the addition of the fingertip protection that I referenced earlier, these are the gauntlets that I anticipate, despite their additional weight, that I anticipate that I'll be using most often when I'm fighting longsword in an SCA environment. Also with arming sword in an SCA environment, because in SCA sparring, the sparring is a little more controlled. In a HEMA context, frankly, I would probably go with the Red Dragon, although I still, for a single-handed weapon, I'd be comfortable using the steel gauntlets. And in fact, when I go later in this year to Combat Con, I'll probably be bringing both sets to use in case. But as you can see, the Red Dragon gauntlets, they need to be broken a little more, but they're fairly articulated. They work pretty well, but the articulation limitations on the Red Dragon, in my experience so far, are not really in the ability to bend and straighten your fingers, but rather because they're padded and because the lanes that protect your fingers are wider than on the steel gauntlets, your fingers are pushed a little farther apart. So when you're trying to fold the fingers over, they tend to overlap each other. It's just not quite as natural a grip or natural a hand movement as you get with the steel gauntlets. And then, of course, and frankly unsurprisingly, the Nyman, because they're a three-finger design, are much more limiting. Your range of motion is much more limited, but frankly that's to be expected given that these gauntlets are intended to protect you, particularly in longsword fighting, in HEMA competitions. And there's no doubt in my mind they absolutely excel in that. However, you will have limited wrist mobility, you'll have limited mobility of your fingers while fighting with them. So, overall, how would I rate these? Again, for fighting in HEMA tournaments with a longsword, there's no question that you should be going with the Nyman fencing, or you know, a three-finger design that's similar to that provides additional protection. For single hand weapons, I don't think the Nyman is necessary unless you're fighting at something like Battle of the Nations, maybe. But the Red Dragon gauntlets and the steel gauntlets, I think, are perfectly acceptable for that. Again, the caveat being with the steel gauntlets, you might want to consider adding the fingertip protectors. Purple Heart, I believe, sells those for around $12 American. But really, these two gauntlets, in my opinion, with the modifications again to the steel, are fairly neck and neck. I know that there's a lot of practitioners in HEMA, a lot of prominent practitioners in HEMA, who don't really like the steel gauntlets for some reason. They are heavy, absolutely, there's no question in that regard. But there also seems to be a little bit of a prejudice, and that's a topic for another time, I guess, but there is a little bit of a prejudice I've picked up on among HEMA practitioners that say, well, we don't want to use something like this that looks maybe a little too fantasy-ish. Frankly, when you're doing historical fencing, I don't understand the concept of not using historical fencing gear, but again, to each his own, in my opinion. But the Red Dragon are excellent, excellent gauntlets. I encourage you to consider them if you're looking for hand protection. And again, the steel gauntlets also work very well. They're a little more expensive than the Red Dragon. They're a little heavier than the Red Dragon, but in my opinion, and based on my experience of using them, they actually have better finger articulation and wrist articulation, actually, as well, than either the Red Dragon or the Nyman fencing. So, there you go. I hope that's helpful. I hope I've given you some objective information to evaluate these on. If you have any questions, put them in the comments below, and I'll see if I can answer them. But again, for my usage, when I go to Combat Con later this year, I anticipate that I'll be using the Red Dragon gauntlets primarily for the sword and buckler tournaments. But again, I'll be bringing the steel gauntlets as backup just in case.